English translation 257th contact. Monday, the 3rd of February 1997, 003 HRS.
Ah, what joy, my friend. Welcome, Ptaah.
Eduard, I am happy to see you again. Greetings also from my daughters Semjase and Pleija. Also, Quetzal, Asket and Nera greet you cordially, as well as all others who know you. I am also supposed to send you greetings, even if you do not know them, and all of them will send you special wishes for your 60th birthday.
Thank you very much. It is new to me that you have special wishes for a birthday, but you are never safe from surprises.
It is true that we usually do not show obligation with such wishes and congratulations. However, it was decided by us that in this, simply in your case, we should do so, which is why I also express my congratulations and best wishes to you.
Again, thank you very much. I appreciate the honor, and please, pass on the words of my thanks to everyone.
I will gladly do that.
May I ask you right now what is going on with the transmission gate? Is the technology soon so advanced that it works, or is everything already perfect?
No, unfortunately still not. It is going to be a long time before everything really works fine and there is no danger of a malfunction.
Too bad. I thought that I could visit Semjase soon. Maybe also Quetzal, who said years ago that he would come back soon.
He has not forgotten that, my friend. If all goes well, he will keep his promise this year.
I would be very happy. I soon do not know if I can remember his face at all. But may I now present you with my questions that have accumulated during your absence? We can discuss all the private things later.
Of course.
Thank you. Ah, now the phone is ringing. Wait, I have to take the call, because Eva is busy in the living room over there with our little daughter Selena Mercedes and cannot leave. Short telephone conversation with Marianne Schmeling in America. Excuse me, Ptaah. It was Marianne Schmeling from America. She congratulated me on my birthday. And precisely because of America, I wanted to ask you a question that you have already had answered by Florina.
You just spoke on the phone about Eva and your daughter Selena Mercedes. I am completely uninformed, because Florina did not tell me anything about it either. I was absent for 9 months and did not receive any information worth mentioning, so I was of the opinion that nothing special had happened, otherwise Florina would have reported this to me. What is real now?
I simply forgot to tell Florina that Eva was pregnant, so she could not know anything, because you were the only one operating the control disk in which everything should be stored.
I have not had a chance to retrieve them yet because I am coming here straight from Era to you.
All right, I will explain everything to you then. As you know, my wife maliciously left me in 1994, and since then has also been working maliciously against me and my mission, especially together with the Basel wannabe UFO expert BL, who also calls himself a journalist, as well as with the former FIGU members HR, TK, and BJ, who all live in Munich or in its closer or further surroundings. My wife as well as HR were present at several of your demonstrations, so they saw your ships and heard their sirens high in the sky, which they deny today. Today they actually deny all their experiences in this regard, whereby HR and his like-minded cronies, who all pretended to be my friends for years, together used my Andromeda energy ship photos for forgeries in order to prove that my photos are also forgeries. Now, since my ex-wife has left and I am still in legal proceedings with her because of the divorce, Eva and I have come together in a life partnership, from which our little daughter Selena Mercedes has emerged, who was born on 18.1. 1997.
This is very good news, my friend, of which I really had no idea. I cordially offer you my congratulations and rejoice with you over your offspring. I am sure I can also congratulate you on my daughters Semjase and Pleija, as well as Quetzal, Asket, Nera, Talida, Manara, and all the others who will be as surprised and delighted as I am myself. This is really good news.
Thank you, Ptaah. Thank you very much. But can I start with my questions now?
Of course.
So, through Florina, I let you ask how we should act towards the Americans in the future regarding our mission and the information system. You have let me be informed by her that we should keep everything simple as before, and not make a special effort to build anything up in America, because this is not our area of responsibility, but that of the Americans themselves, who would have to do everything themselves, including for all translations of our writings and books, etc., into their own language, whereby they would also have to take over the printing and distribution of these on their own initiative, including the financial issues, etc., which arise. According to Florina's statement, however, we should only be concerned for our friends and acquaintances in America, and for those who are really interested, and only reach out to them. But we should not do anything else.
That is correct. You know that we have no interest at all in you making efforts in America in our cause as well as in your mission, because the initiative in this matter must come only from the Americans. You are also aware of the other reasons why we distance ourselves from America. We made a pointless attempt to get in touch with the American government.
I know. On the one hand, this attempt, where you sent a letter to the American government through me and via EL from Flagstaff in Arizona, was a response to haughty demands that you could not accept, which is why the connection could not be established. And on the other hand, there are the underhand American efforts to cover up everything concerning UFOs and extraterrestrials, and secretly use them for military armament, as well as for the exercise of military and political power. In addition to these facts about aliens and their aircraft, etc., it is also true that the majority of the major political and military Americans, as well as a certain part of the population, are conceited, profit-seeking, self-opinionated, and lying, while many other extremely negative aspects are added, such as the inhuman demand and practice of the death penalty, and the completely false sense of peace and freedom, etc.
This corresponds to the given facts. You should not make a special effort for America out of the mentioned and many other negative facts, because these people are by and large not yet ready for the truth in the form that it could be applied in an honest and positively beneficial manner. The level of responsibility of the great mass of Americans is still formed in such a manner that everything and anything is applied negatively. For these reasons, you should not make a special effort for America, but only shake hands with those who honestly and willingly ask for it. Honest friends, acquaintances, and honest interested parties.
We will, of course, keep to this, even if it is often very difficult to separate the chaff from the grain. By the way, from this month on, we are on the internet. We exchanged some private words about it last May.
Doing this step was good. Worldwide communication is becoming increasingly important.
That is what our group members thought. Christian Frainer is, by the way, the man who manages the whole thing. But now something else. You told me years ago that BSE, or mad cow disease, could be transmitted to all mammals. That means all mammals as well as humans, no?
Yes, that was the meaning of my words.
Good. Now the extended question, can the species barrier be broken at any time in this relationship?
Yes, if an infection takes place in some kind and wise.
What about non-mammals like fish, birds, and chicken birds, as well as lizards, etc.?
No, not in one of the known forms. Nevertheless, all life forms can be affected by a brain disease that has certain similarities to the actual prion disease and can be described in a broader sense as originating from it. The symptoms that emerge are generally very similar to those of prion disease. However, we have only had this insight since 1995, and it is estimated that years will pass before scientists will recognize this fact.
As far as I know, the prion disease changes from life-form genus to life-form genus. You told me that in our last conversation.
That is indeed so. Each time a species barrier is overcome, a pathogen change occurs, which makes it possible for another life form to fall ill after all.
A quite common affair. Could we learn more about it?
On the one hand, this would be too extensive, and on the other hand, I am not allowed to give any official information about it.
Because of the directives?
Yes, that's why.
Well, then something else. You probably remember recommending that I remove the so-called wedding cake ships photos from the albums after my ex-wife with HR and BL, etc. slandered the pictures as a barrel lid ship, etc. Is it now necessary that the photos remain removed from the albums after I have published an appropriate flyer and an article in Bulletin number 10, as you can see here? This is the flyer.
Thanks, I will deal with it later. You can share the pictures.
Also good. Here is also the new bulletin, just the 10th one.
I also thank you for that.
Let me know how you feel about it when you have read it.
Of course I will give you my opinion, but I am sure you did everything right. I think that you said everything that needed to be said and explained.
I was asked what Tito, the dictator of the former Yugoslavia, actually did with his enemies. Do you know anything about that?
Yes. Tito maintained several concentration camps in which humans who were hostile to him or his state were imprisoned and pathetically abused, resulting in the deaths of many. A total of around 470,000 people were detained in these camps.
But as far as I know, no one has ever heard of that.
That's right. Everything was concealed, and still today everything is largely unknown. Only a few initiated circles have knowledge of these earlier occurrences. These initiates also include journalists who, however, do not make much effort to uncover the atrocities committed in the internment camps at that time. Even the fact of the existence of the former detention camps is concealed for whatever reason.
They can be very diverse, ranging from politics to financial profit in the form of silencing money, etc.
That probably has its correctness.
That is also what I'm thinking. But now the next question. On the 17th of July, 1996, a jumbo jet, a Boeing 747, exploded shortly after takeoff in New York or something like that, and crashed into the sea, causing about 230 deaths. Do you know anything about it?
Certainly, because such incidents are recorded by our surveillance aircraft. Florina also informed me about this unfortunate incident. But why do you ask?
Simply because I'm interested in why the plane exploded. The Americans made several statements, but we do not know if one of them is correct.
I can give you information about that. Of course, the Americans want to hide the truth and avoid it by some flimsy explanations, because it is their own fault that the misfortune happened. The truth is that the U.S. Navy fired a defensive missile at the plane and was hit by it and caused to explode. Whether this happened intentionally or unintentionally could not be clarified by us yet, but it seems to us after the past investigations that both possibilities must be considered.
Why is that?
It is actually still too early to talk about this.
But what reason could there have been to sacrifice so many people?
An espionage-active person who, to our knowledge, was aboard the plane and carried important knowledge, but who had escaped the American Secret Service. There is no doubt that this person was on board, but it is still unclear whether it was intentionally shot down as a result. It is possible, however, that so many people were sacrificed because of a single spy. But our investigations will show whether this is really true.
That would really be terrible if that were true. But in political, military, and Secret Service contexts, much worse crimes have already been committed in which thousands or even tens of thousands of people have lost their lives. Just think of the radioactive contamination tests carried out by the Americans and the British, etc., which have killed thousands and thousands of people, which of course has been concealed. And just because of the concealment, I have written an article here, if you want to read it briefly. Ah, yes. But first again, a question concerning the suspected spy in the crashed plane, whose flight information was designated TWA-800 to my knowledge, and which, to be more precise, crashed in Mauritius Bay off the coast of Long Island. where UFO activities have been recorded for quite some time, as I take from my note here. I would now be interested to know in what context the espionage activity was supposed to have been, military or economic.
Our findings so far have shown that the person in question had secret information of a military nature in relation to various incidents involving unidentified flying objects in the Mauritius Bay area, etc., and in relation to the so-called Brookhaven SDI experiments. Whether the plane was deliberately shot down because of this spy, in order to silence him in this manner, is only one possibility, because another is that everything was an accident, although it is undoubtedly certain that the U.S. Navy launched the missile. But there is another possibility which we also have to consider, and that is that the aircraft was probably detected on the tracking equipment of the U.S. Navy, but was considered as a so-called UFO, whereupon an order to shoot it down followed. And we have to consider this possibility even more than the one with the spying person. But I cannot tell you anything more about it yet. But I have to wait and see what the research of Florena's group, which handles everything in this respect, will show.
All sorts of things. If you know the facts, can you find out what the research has revealed?
Of course, because no secret should be made of it, since it is an incident that has a criminal background, if our previous investigations should prove to be completely true.
Let me ask you a question about the continued secrecy of certain facts of events that you have explained to me over the years, and for which you have urged me to remain silent. Am I allowed to speak freely about all things or not?
You may speak freely about those matters, dates, and facts that we have allowed you to name. All other facts, however, you shall keep under lock and key within yourself.
So everything stays the same. And of course I will follow your instructions and name only those things I may speak about without hesitation. Then I would have another question now, which refers to the coming and appearance of extraterrestrials who have no connection whatsoever with you, and who should actually make open contact with Earth humans. Can I find out, for example, when this time will really be? The date once mentioned to me has become obsolete, because things have occurred with Earth humans and in their politics, which made the appearance of the extraterrestrials impossible.
The time is relatively close according to our terms, but for certain reasons I will not name the more exact time, because thereby steps could be taken by the Earth human, which would thwart everything another time. If, however, you only want to have the information for yourself, then I will gladly give you information.
No, I just officially asked the question because I want to consider our conversation as an official contact report.
Then the question should only be answered in such a manner that no exact dates are mentioned. It must therefore suffice if I say that the time is relatively near at which people of an alien world will appear openly on this planet.
After which you will finally withdraw, as you have always assured.
That was always the meaning of our explanations in this regard.
Your concepts of time are of course different from ours here on the Earth. So your word is a broad concept if you say that the time is already relatively near when official contact between extraterrestrials and terrestrial humans can be expected.
The time is really not very far away anymore. The only question with the expected contacts is whether the military, secret services, and governments do not recast the public appearance in such a manner that the public is misled and the real facts are not falsified and concealed again, as this was handled with regard to previous incidents of a similar kind with extraterrestrial flying devices, ships, and beings of foreign worlds.
Besides you Plejarians and the members of your Federation, there are also other alien beings visiting our world, whose flying devices, ships, can be observed here and there.
That is correct, but not our concern, because we do not maintain any contacts to these very rare aliens, just as we do not maintain any contacts to Earth humans. In physical as well as telepathic form, you are the only human on the Earth who has maintained contacts with us for years, as we have often explained. Earlier contacts with Earth humans are excluded, however, as you know, because such contacts actually existed at times. However, these were terminated very early. So the situation today is that all those who claim to be in telepathic, physical, or in contact in any other manner with any spirit beings or physically existing people of our race are liars, deceivers, charlatans, or delusional. For many years now, you have been the only human on Earth who can say about yourself with a clear conscience and truthfulness that you are in physical, spiritual, telepathic, and spiritually fine feeling-based contact with us.
I know that, because you have truthfully already said that often enough. But all the swindlers, the delusionally sick ones, and the cheaters do not concern themselves about that, just like the charlatans and the liars also do not.
Which unfortunately corresponds to the truth.
Also in relation to Ashtar Sharon, a lot is lied about. Again and again people come to us who still believe in the nonsense that he still transmits messages to the Earth people and intends a rescue of his followers on the Earth. People simply do not want to accept the truth that this Athar Saran, as his real name was, which was erroneously interpreted on Earth and changed into Ashtar Sharan, was eliminated already years ago in the Dal universe during his criminal fighting actions. Consequently, also his spirit form and his overall consciousness block are no longer present in our Dern universe.
Lies, swindle, fraud, and delusions of all kinds unfortunately very often have a very long lifespan. Therefore, it is not surprising that even the most incredible Ashtar Sharan stories still circulate as strongly as in former times. And it is not surprising that new delusionally ill ones, liars, fraudsters, charlatans, and swindlers appear again and again in this regard. Because with such untruthful things, a lot of money and other profits can be made on the Earth with believers who respond to them. A fact that also applies to the so-called UFO contacts, that is to say, to the alleged contacts with extraterrestrials.
Let's ask a question concerning the ancient Earthlings. Did they also act as primitively and dumbly at the appearance of extraterrestrials, as it is the case with today's humankind, particularly even with the military, the secret services, and the governments, as well as the sectarians?
No comparison can be made in the matter of military, secret services, and governments. Where people acted abnormally, there was actually the delusion in play by which Earth foreigners were judged either as devils or as gods. In military, secret service, and governmental respects, however, with few exceptions, no aggressive machinations were common regarding the Earth foreigners, which unfortunately has changed drastically in modern times.
Certain humans have become dumber instead of more normal.
In a certain regard, you are right. But let me read your article.
One moment, please, before I forget. The Earth foreigners you mentioned, who are supposed to contact Earthlings in the near future, do they have any knowledge about you and your dimension?
No, in no wise. They will have neither knowledge of our presence here, nor knowledge of our home dimension and our home worlds. But we will not make ourselves recognizable to them either.
Then here are some questions I would like to ask you before you start reading the article, if you allow me.
Of course.
Thanks. Again and again the question arises whether Petrus really was the first pope. I know that you have already informed me about this at an earlier time, and explained that Petrus never held the papal office. This statement of yours, however, has never been recorded in writing, which is why I am now once again officially asking you for the answer.
It has its correctness with what you said. Petrus never held the office of pope.
And what is it about the Vatican's claim that Petrus's skeletal remains were found in the Vatican or something?
This assertion corresponds to a deliberately created lie, because the mortal remains of Petrus were then cremated by delusional Christian enemies, because they were of the belief that he could return. The matter with the found skeletal remains can be clarified by the fact that they belong to a man who was a church servant during his lifetime, who had to maintain the church buildings and ensure order.
I know that you take a positive view of genetic engineering, which here on the Earth is usually simply called gene manipulation. But would it not be possible for you to clarify your point of view once again for this contact discussion?
Of course I can. Genetic engineering is an evolutionary factor that cannot be stopped by terrestrial humans. The advent of genetic engineering, which can actually be called gene manipulation, is a compelling factor in development. Therefore, it is completely nonsensical to want to take steps against it to prevent this progress. But whoever does this nevertheless is not master of their mind, or they are an evolution querulant. Genetic engineering or gene manipulation is not only a compelling factor of development, as I said, but a necessity, on which even large parts of the future of humankind on the Earth and his or her existence depend. Instead of taking dubious and disturbing steps against genetic engineering or genetic manipulation, it would be right to think about the really positive use of this technology, so that it can be researched and operated openly before further secret experiments are carried out through negation, and thus disaster is conjured up, which will be an inevitable consequence if the Earth human does not soon come to insight through reason and real knowledge.
Thanks. Now here are the pages of the article. I would be interested whether you have yet some statements or remarks to make about it that I could use to expand on, or whether I should leave it all as is. However, I do not find an expansion absolutely necessary, but if you recommend it, then I would be happy to do this. But now read first one time, and if you think that it requires yet further explanation, then tell me.
Extraterrestrials.
I am often asked whether then only the Pleiadian Pleiarans come to Earth as extraterrestrials. Naturally, that is not the case, because there exists yet various other extraterrestrials who fly into terrestrial airspace and can also often be observed. They are, in part, members of the Pleiadian Pleiarans Federation, who cannot, however, be counted as foreigners, who stem from planets and solar systems that have no state of affairs at all with the Pleiadian Pleiarans and their Federation worlds. These foreign extraterrestrials come from the most different star systems, which as a rule belong to our galaxy, respectively, the Milky Way, whereby, however, exceptions also exist, however only very few, in which the extraterrestrials stem from foreign and millions of light-year distant galaxies. There are, however, few like this to note that they can only be spoken of as a rarity. In every case, caution is recommended in relation to the extraterrestrials and contact with them, as well as in relation to the observed UFOs, because for a long time not all of that which was said and asserted in this regard was correct. Deceptions can be present during the observations of UFOs, as well as the actual observation of extraterrestrial flying devices, etc. Thus, where dealing with such an observation, it is often very difficult to clear up. Yet it may be accepted that a certain small percentage of all observations actually lead back to extraterrestrial flying devices, which are seen in ever greater numbers around the world. The majority of the observations do not, however, correspond to reality, but rather touch upon imaginations and such like, that many times are only the consequence of certain science fiction films, etc., that would arouse the susceptible humans to fantasies through which they then see or experience imaginary things in the sky that have nothing to do with reality. And just these imaginations, that often extend to real vision, are very plentiful. But this should not prejudice the facts, and mean that all observations are of this kind, because there actually are still enough cases of UFO observations that undoubtedly rest upon such really occurring extraterrestrial and partly also other dimensional flying devices which have nothing to do with the Pleiadian Pleiarans and their confederates. Rather, they belong to other worlds and civilizations. One regarding the contacts with extraterrestrials. The circumstances are partly the same as with the UFO observations, in the form that a fantasy is called forth, because actually any contact with extraterrestrials occurs only in the most exceedingly rare cases, and as a rule also only in an unintended form. Intentional extraterrestrial contact with Earth humans would normally be taken up only most rarely, whereby the so-called examination contacts predominate, whereby the Earth humans would be abducted for examinations, respectively, analyses, and hauled into spaceships. However, those examination contacts have nothing to do with the mass hysteria of the alleged abductions, through which they would inflict pain or steal sperm or the fruit of the wombs from abductees, to breed a new species of human, etc. Many times these mass hysterias rest upon certain phobias under which the allegedly abducted ones suffer, as well as sleep paralysis visions and real vision, etc., that convey an impression to the beset humans that they have or have had an actual experience. But there are still all of those who assert that they maintain physical or telepathic contact with extraterrestrials, mostly connected with religious, sectarian, delusional teachings and assertions that withstand no reason. But in this matter, it is exactly these religious, delusional teachings and assertions from which very many humans feel addressed and which these contactees believe, who in truth are either profit-obsessed deceivers, wigged-out sectarian fanatics, or simple charlatans, who altogether, however, lead their believers around by the nose. Thereby, not to be forgotten at any rate, are the chronically delusional who suffer from some form of schizophrenia or simply imagination. Therefore, the greatest caution is recommended with extraterrestrial contacts in the sky, because too much about this are lies, deception, swindle, charlatanism and speculation, etc., whereby also the truth-despising efforts and falsifications as well as disinformation machinations of the governments are implicated through the committal and establishment of unbelievable lies, slanders, falsifications, and trickeries in the world to veil the truth, to contradict and to deny. The Roswell UFO crash is just one of many inglorious examples. Naturally, not all terrestrial governments and military work in this slimy way, but there are many. And they get ever more difficulty from those peoples who are really interested in the UFO clarification and the events connected therewith, as they turn the heat up under the governments, the military, and the secret services. The time namely presses ever more, because ever more UFO incidents take place, and also pure UFO observations increase ever further. So the responsible ones use their lies, defamation, and denial ever less, whereby they apply a new obscuring technique to keep the actual existence of extraterrestrials secret, as well as their visits to the Earth. Their new method is to demonize everything that has to do with UFOs and extraterrestrials. That, thereby, also serves to hinder the coming about of contact with extraterrestrials and civilians, because that can no longer be controlled, and because, as a rule, civilians who are not bound by a military or Secret Service security status do not shy away from making such experiences and events openly known. But such open information is exceedingly uncomfortable and even exceedingly dangerous for the governments, as well as for the military and secret services, etc., as their power structures could become shaky. Of this it was already clear to a whole lineup of authorities as well as their military and secret services in the First World War, because over the battlefields of Europe, UFOs were observed whose appearance was kept secret, however. It went the same direction in the Second World War, as the Foo Fighters surfaced everywhere. Indeed, it was already firmly established by the military and secret services and highest government positions by the First and Second World Wars that UFOs were of extraterrestrial origin, yet the secrecy was still maintained. The facts of the extraterrestrial origins of flying devices was recognized in America through the observation of a landing of such an object, where 4 unusually clothed humanoid beings disembarked, collected some plants in the vicinity, re-entered their device, and flew away. The observers of these events were 2 members of the military who, coincidentally, were in just that area while on vacation. Both reported the event to the nearest military facility, allowing the secret investigations and clarifications to proceed, as had already happened in other similar cases that preceded, and also subsequently occurred even more. But everything happened under the strictest non-disclosure, as the Pleiadian Pleiarans have affirmed, so the public received no knowledge about these incidents whatsoever, as neither did the main body of the governments, the military, and the secret services. It was always only the very highest positions and officials who were privy to the secrets. And it was also these humans who even then concerned themselves with and worked out concealment tactics to deceive most of their subordinates and the entire population. It was to be avoided that on one hand, everything would be known, and on the other hand, that those not in the know and not sworn to secrecy or even civilian personnel could have contact with extraterrestrials. Therefore, a possibility was sought to place fear in humans in relation to the extraterrestrials so that no contact would result from a possible landing or from a crash of extraterrestrial devices. Naturally, already in those times there were civilian observers of UFOs, but if this was to be avoided, there would still be fundamentally nothing given recognition in the open media. They also led the population to believe that these strange flying devices were their own secret flying machines, which were just then undergoing initial testing. Therefore, the humans, already at that time, were knowingly being led into the dark. Silence was maintained regarding what the UFOs effectively were, namely extraterrestrial and partly foreign dimensional interplanetary flying devices controlled by crews foreign to Earth. Naturally, in those days, the flying devices were not yet called UFOs, but were given other names. But that does not diminish the fact that already after the outbreak of the First World War in 1915, the American President Woodrow Wilson ordered a non-disclosure in respect of extraterrestrial flying objects, and decreed measures to cover himself with what had been written. The consequences of this unofficial, secret edict, of which also U.S. Presidents Warren G. Harding as well as Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, whereby especially Roosevelt, were finally the driving power, was that the angst for extraterrestrial conquerors would be incited to panic, and indeed through a perfidious machination, together with the Secret Service, through which book authors would be threatened with death in order to start an extremely effective horror scenario. U.S. President Harry Truman was then also later drawn into the conspiracy because he even cooperated as the highest-placed observer of UFO crash sites. However, things of this kind were not only happening in America, because also in Russia, as also in other countries, people were becoming attentive to the UFOs and secretly held the view that it must concern extraterrestrial flying devices, even when, always again meanwhile, voices from the uninitiated grew loud in Russia as well as in America, that these thereby dealt with new kinds of enemy aircraft. Party leader and dictator Joseph W. Stalin was, for example, like various U.S. presidents, at different times an observer of UFOs, from which he was quickly convinced, despite the angst for the new flying machines of the Americans, that it dealt with intelligences foreign to Earth. One fact that he, however, never made openly known, as also happened with the fact that practically every UFO observation in the Soviet Union fell under secrecy provisions. The darkening, slandering, and obscuring machinations of many governments, militaries, and secret services, etc., of different countries began therefore already very early, and indeed much earlier than would be generally accepted by the real UFO researchers. According to the explanation of the Pleiadian Pleiarans, however, especially the Americans lead in this respect, whereby these were also those who held the proof of the existence of extraterrestrial flying objects tight in their hands already early, and indeed not first since the Roswell case. Truly, already earlier the Americans had parts of wreckage from crashed extraterrestrial flying devices fall into their hands, as well as mutilated extraterrestrial corpses, which, however, fell under the strictest non-disclosure, and whereby, as the Pleiadian Plejarians explained, also undesired UFO crash and UFO recovery observers, as well as recovery workers, were erased or forced into silence under the gravest threats. But that was not enough by far, because the longer the UFO appearances in the New Age were observed, the more secretively these were dealt with, and indeed not the least on that account, because the arrival of the extraterrestrials and the enslavement of the terrestrial humanity through the invaders was feared by the American government and their military, as well as secret services. And so that the population should be left in ignorance about the truth of the existence of extraterrestrials. Nevertheless, however, that fear must be developed in the peoples against the extraterrestrials, out of which a far-reaching hate must be established against the invaders, and, thereby, once again a defensive rage steered by hate should result. The U.S. presidency, as well as the leading officers of the military and the secret services, etc., came upon a psychologically sophisticated idea to work out a horror scenario in extraterrestrial matters, and to start it in such a form that not only America would be seized by it, rather also great parts of the rest of the world. This scenario should be configured in such a manner that once angst and panic should first break out regarding extraterrestrial invaders, thereafter they then spread further fear and hate far and could spread it over the world, and indeed also then, when it would be officially recognized, that it all only dealt with fiction and therefore a poor utopian piece of work. Thereby the psychological trick would be established, that when once fear is sown, then from that yet greater fear, and finally also panic and hate must develop, that follows itself further, always spreading out farther. A fact that was already known then and also today, yet would be practiced again and again over the whole world in different relationships. And exactly angst and terror were necessary, according to the view of the responsible ones, to incite the population against the extraterrestrials, and to prevent them from coming into contact with them if the opportunity should present itself. Through this perfidious and fully thought-out psychological machination of the highest government authorities, as well as the military and secret services, it also should be avoided that at any time any one of the people would gain admission to the extraterrestrials if the opportunity offered itself. The responsible ones not only had fear of a peaceful extraterrestrial official or unofficial landing and contact initiative, but they also feared an invasion. And because an official or unofficial extraterrestrial appearance and effect on the Earth was not compatible with the religious philosophies, since 1915, Pope Benedict XV, 1914 to 1922, as well as Pius XVII, 1922 to 1939, and Pius XIV, 1939 to 1958, would also be drawn into the entire conspiracy. Also, certain Jewish dignitaries were enlisted in this, who even at that time in America had quite a bit to say and had a voice. In the most secret of missions, it was therefore resolved to create a horror scenario which would agitate the population on one hand, who, however, should be left in ignorance of the truth of the existence of the extraterrestrials who already maneuvered in terrestrial airspace and also landed sporadically on the Earth, as it has been established from secure sources, and through that, on the other hand, that fear and hate be sown against the strangers from other worlds. The mean and slimy trick was in and of itself simple. A radio broadcast should be transmitted, that on one hand spreads angst and terror of the extraterrestrials, and on the other hand should also strike very far, and as much as possible, worldwide circles. To this end, through American Secret Service agents, as well as through the responsible superiors of these positions of duty, as well as the government and militarily, suitable authors and works were sought, which could be exploited and used for the perfidious machination. It was U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt President, the 4th of March, 1933, the 12th of April, 1945, who quite personally, however, sought out the science fiction work of Englishman Herbert George Wells, who as an author in 1898 brought out a work under the title War of the Worlds. In this episode, American Secret Service agents made contact with Wells and beseeched him coercively to adapt his work to a radio play. But the man himself did not feel in a position to do this, so he suggested chartering a young American author of his acquaintance, Orson Welles, who would certainly be suitable. Under threats of death, H.G. Wells was obliged to lifelong silence, after which, then in America, the still young Orson Welles would be coerced by the Secret Service people to refashion H.G. Wells's work, War of the Worlds, into a realistic-seeming horror radio play. Out of the science fiction novel Wells wrote in 1897 and published in 1898, such a work that broadcast on the radio would release wild panic and angst as well as hate for the extraterrestrials. The work, in which extraterrestrials, formed unlike humans and of monstrous and evil nature, land on the earth and cause trouble and destruction, was exactly that which had been hoped for by the responsible ones of governments, the military and the secret services. It is no wonder that as a result of panic breaking out, there was quite a number of dead. With the broadcast of the horror play, the goal of the government, the military and the secret services was achieved because from then on fear, and also a certain hate, prevailed against the extraterrestrials of the kind and form, as well as the sense, that was also always desired. And exactly that has remained that way until today, and even still spreads out, because fear and hate would again always be newly stirred up, and the American Secret Service powers, etc., are especially proficient in doing exactly that. Were that not enough, that they, and certain also determined government and military powers, financially support and demand contra-films against the extraterrestrials? No, they do not shy from simulating all kinds of horror events like, for example, abductions by extraterrestrials, as well as human and animal mutilations and so on and so forth. They are also not inactive in matters relating to the falsification of crop circles, and indeed in the most differing countries. Naturally, in respect of all these things, there are also charlatans, deceivers and swindlers and every other sort. Yet the Secret Service machinations are probably indeed the worst, because it is precisely through these that disinformation is established, through which the genuine and actual events in this regard are bedeviled and made laughable. Scarcely anything is known about exactly this, as everything runs so secretly as it always has, and as does the actual story of the radio play of War of the Worlds by Orson Welles. And the danger exists that something could not be held secret, then the responsible ones of the government and military as well as the secret services do not shy away from bringing the witnesses to silence under death threats or through an otherwise erasing, like for example through elimination or through a consciousness-stupefying brainwash and psychoterror and so forth. Herbert George Wells, who died on the 13th of August 1946, also knew that, as did Orson Welles, who departed this life on October 10, 1985. Neither left behind any indications about the true incidents regarding the radio play, as they correctly feared that their families, friends, and acquaintances also could be vengefully persecuted after their demise by the Secret Service people and the responsible ones of the government and military. And that I now do not hold my tongue about that which the Pleiadian Pleiarans explained to me in regard to this. What comes of that remains to be seen. The nasty machinations of the government, military and Secret Service people in respect of the demonizing of extraterrestrials have increased ever more since 1938. Indeed, slowly and successively. Thus, however, all the more incessantly and expansively, until in the 80s, essentially, the greatest machination for the bedevilment of extraterrestrials began, through a shifty structure in the fashion of the Secret Service, as well as miscellaneous UFO and extraterrestrial enemies. Stories came about like the ghastly human and animal mutilations, the theft of human babies, and the impregnating of terrestrial women through foreign visitors from outer space. Horror stories were also disseminated about subterranean laboratories and the inhuman experiments taking place there. Were that still not enough? Because the angst of the extraterrestrials wreaked even worse blooms. Like, for example, it would be asserted that women impregnated by aliens would, after some months, have the baby growing in the womb snatched out to be allowed to finally grow further in a fluid-filled incubator, etc., in order to breed up a new humanity, etc., using these hybrid children. A further horror story was that the Earth humans would be abducted in order to take their genetic material that would be necessary for the extraterrestrials' further breeding of humans, who would serve as, so to say, nourishment providers, because the evil foreigners from out of the depths of space supposedly nourish themselves on human blood. Similarly, it would also be asserted in respect to the animal mutilations in America, whereby the related far-fetched feeble-mindedness that namely beef blood demonstrates a genetic relationship with human blood. Therefore, the mutilated cattle would have their blood sucked out to store in the blood banks for crisis times, naturally through the evil extraterrestrials. Yet even that is not enough, because still many other assertions, slanderings and lies, and clearly to be recognized as feeble-minded, are put about, through which the humans are led into error and would be shifted into angst and terror, as has had manifold success. And certain mass hysteria has been released by a worldwide group of certain Earth humans, which also leads to feelings of hate, etc. What there is yet to say to the government, military and Secret Service people, and to the nonsense already bordering on idiocy, and out of the sight of the rational human understanding of everything, may be said with the words of renowned and experienced UFO researcher and Magazine 2000 commentator Michael Hesemann, who, together with Ingrid Schlotterbeck, in Magazine 2000 editorial number 6, 1996, Oct Novra, writes the following. The U.S. government, so asserts for example the ex-Marine officer William Cooper, has made an evil bargain with the extraterrestrials, space technology in exchange for land and humans. At the start of the 70s, one first comprehended just how devilish the visitors really are. And only since Ronald Reagan would one react, building the Star Wars system as defense for Earth and humanity against sinister extraterrestrials. A clear message lies behind it. How good that we have the military which is powerfully armed to defy the evil aliens. So the arms race towards the end of the Cold War still had its sense and purpose, and even this message is conveyed by a film that exploded all box office records. The already now most successful film of all time is called Independence Day, the alien apocalypse of the Schwab, Southwest German Roland Emmerich. And it concerns itself naturally with the salvation of the best of all possible worlds, the USA, which is threatened by the space devils. But all these horror scenarios have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with reality. One almost attempts to establish an AADL, an Alien Anti-Defamation League. Because in the annals of UFO research, there has not been one authentic, that means thoroughly investigated and determined to be genuine, case asterisk that points to an aggressive behavior or hostile intentions of extraterrestrials. So to go straight to the most frequent objection, yes, the abductions are perceived as traumatic by many victims. That has different reasons. The entire situation is frightening. The fear of the unknown. Medical procedures that are sometimes also painful. The complete lack of emotions of the visitor. The feeling of being helplessly extradited. Their utter alienness that is often interpreted as ugliness. We do not know why the abductions take place, whether out of scientific curiosity or, as many victims would explain, in order to establish a data bank of humanity, in case we destroy the Earth. Now medical examinations on the Earth are also often painful. Many abductees have the feeling of having made themselves available unconsciously or in a past life, and draw benefit from this expansion of their consciousness. Clearly negative, the abductees are therefore not at all. Yes, airplanes have crashed that have chased UFOs. But that has various reasons. One pilot hunted after a UFO so long that he ran out of fuel. Another attained too great an altitude, becoming unconscious. Again, in other cases, the interceptor received an order to fire, but their automatic weaponry seized. In one case, already diffused rockets exploded when still in the jet. The aggressor was killed by his own weapons, but not by the visitor. There was a case in Brazil in which a farmer shot at a landed UFO. He was struck by a ray which paralyzed him for an hour. He could subsequently move normally. Yes, there are humans who have come very close to UFOs and have suffered radiation damage. But those are cases that can clearly be classified as accidents. On the other hand, terrestrial militaries have fired on UFOs all too often, and in some cases even shot them down. There never was an act of retaliation, as is usual on Earth. Just compare the ghastliest descriptions of alleged UFO witnesses with that which we do to other creatures or even our fellow humans. How have we, as we landed in America, behaved with the technologically inferior Indians? How many Africans did we drag off into lifelong slavery? Didn't the Bosnians previously reciprocally massacre their own next-door neighbors? To which bloodbath does a tribal feud lead in Rwanda? Or think of the acts of horror in the Soviet Gulag or in Red China. Who now says they are merely the others, then be asked, was not the death factory of Auschwitz a German invention? And exactly that indicates which mechanism stands behind the alien panic. We measure them with our rulers. We project our behavior pattern onto them. We fear that they will deal in precisely the same manner that we would deal with technologically inferior peoples and other living beings. They are our projection screen, our mirror image. If extraterrestrials wanted to rule the Earth, they would have long since done so. They certainly would not have waited until we improved our defense systems. In reality, we are the aggressors. Those who greet the friendly visitors with hunter-interceptors and our xenophobia fear of strangers through putting out exo-racist propaganda films, like Independence Day. As the expression imparts, note from Billy, the question about these demonizing efforts against the extraterrestrials is whether the American government, military, and Secret Service-type machinations are behind it, as with War of the Worlds from Orson Welles, in order to newly stir up, and this time in a worldwide mass, angst, panic, and hate in respect of the visitors from foreign worlds. And their answer, messages of concern about our behavior thereover, that we destroy our unique home planets. According to the ethical measures of Buddhism, the bodhisattva qualities apply to today. A bodhisattva is one who has long achieved enlightenment, but has sworn to reincarnate until the last living being is redeemed. One recognizes two qualities in him, wisdom and empathy, and thereby that he lives ahimsa, nonviolence. That means that he has renounced the practice of retribution.
Your article is good and all clarifications conform to the truth. The explanations from Michael Hesemann and Ingrid Schlotterbeck are also to the point.
Do you therefore mean that I can publish the article like that?
That is my meaning, yes.
Well then, a question about the alleged appearance and official landing of extraterrestrials on the Earth. Some people claim that on 27.3, 1997 extraterrestrials should officially land on Earth. Do you know anything about this? You explained all this to me years ago. So everything is nothing but baloney and nonsense that is talked about the comet and the alleged official landing of extraterrestrials on the Earth. I would also have been surprised if it had not been like that. Unfortunately, we have so many crackpots here on the Earth, and unfortunately even more misguided ones who believe all the nonsense of these crackpots. Furthermore, there are still many conscious liars, cheaters, swindlers, and charlatans who take advantage of the New Age madness of the believers and make horrendous profits out of it.
Unfortunately, that is the truth.
It goes to the year 2000, And there it is, of course, like at every turn of the century, or the last turn of the millennium. The doomsday mood, the alleged return of the dear Jesus Christ, as well as the coming of extraterrestrials, or even of the dear God himself. All nonsense. But since your last visit, a lot has happened with us. Is this fully known to you?
No, I am not aware of that because I have not yet had the opportunity to work through the monitoring records, as I have already explained to you.
Well, then read the bulletin and the flyer later. They contain a lot of important information.
I will do that immediately. I will also work through the monitoring records. Obviously, a lot has happened and resulted in my absence, as you say.
Yes, a lot has happened. But again, a question regarding the Hale-Bopp comet. It is also claimed that this comet is not itself Nibiru or Eunice or Nubiru, but that the comet has a planet about 4 times the size of Earth in tow, on which the gods should live and come to the Earth. Another assertion is based on the fact that a huge spaceship with a structure similar to a Saturn ring flies after the comet and steers it, etc. What is it all about? Are there any true things about these assertions?
How many such and similar assertions are also based on sheer nonsense, as I explained to you a few minutes ago in the same context.
So also the comet Hale-Bopp has nothing to do with the near appearance of the extraterrestrials announced by you?
Of course not.
Now I would like to ask what you or you generally think of the Ron Hubbard or Scientology sect.
You call it the right name because it is actually a sect, a rather reprehensible one, whose nonsensical teachings have no valuable philosophical content whatsoever. The whole of the teachings, because it is not one, but a manifold confused work of various things, is of no real value, but corresponds to nonsense and mischief without equal. Moreover, Scientology is a psychosect in the form of a criminal association that brings great damage and is stupid for human beings. It must be called a criminal organization economically and politically, and is only aimed at bringing economic, political, and religious power and control to itself worldwide.
I think that would make our common position clear, because we see this sect in the same form. I wonder how long it will last. How long the governments of all countries will tolerate this criminal organization. The Americans are so stupid that they have officially recognized the sect as a church, and it does not have to pay taxes, and this only because the Scientologists have found skeletons in the closet with various American politicians, with which they could blackmail them in matters of church recognition and tax exemption.
This is true, for Scientologists do not shy away from crime to realize their goals and satisfy their lust for profit and power. This also includes the blackmail of politicians by the authoritative Scientologists, who, according to their Hubbard guidelines, dig around for dirt in the past and in the lives of politicians and their enemies, etc., until they find any facts with which they then blackmail people.
I know that. But I do not understand that the extorted or the blackmailed ones let themselves be blackmailed instead of going public themselves and admitting their mistakes or infamies. But the fallible ones are not honest enough to openly admit their mistakes and criminal actions, because then they could lose their standing, and possibly even more. But in my opinion, a clear conscience would be worth more than an official standing and so on.
That is certainly true. But these fallible ones, as you call them, are not honest and modest like you, so they think only of profit, prestige, public dignity, and their own welfare. And that is exactly what the majority of earthly politicians have in common. But this also includes powerful military, secret service, and power holders of various organizations of a state and private nature, certain police forces and protection troops, etc.
According to my experiences, I would like to count there also still certain relief organizations and/or their violent ones, etc. among them.
Which unfortunately you are not wrong about.
It is actually naive not to be able to understand that the fallible ones can be blackmailed and will not go public.
This is certainly not the case considering your honesty and modesty, which results in your incomprehension.
Maybe you are right, I do not know. But let's not do that, because I still have some questions unanswered. We were talking about the Americans, who are so contemptuous of people that you do not want anything to do with them. If I only think that through the guilt of the American government as well as the military and the scientists, unspeakable suffering has been brought upon the world, such as through the atomic bomb and through the supply of weapons, acts of war and murderous tests, which were perpetrated even on their own people, then everything rebels in me. In the form in which the Americans are misanthropic, not even the beast Saddam Hussein should be in Iraq. But with him, this is surely only because he does not have the same power as the Americans.
That should correspond to the facts. If Saddam Hussein had the same power as the Americans, a global war would have been inevitable long ago.
That brings me to what I wanted to say about the Americans. We have talked about this before, but I think it needs to be said here again. When we talk about the Americans in this manner, we take it for granted that we only mean those of this people who must be regarded as negative. Of course, there can be no talk of positive Americans when we talk of all the negative things, and therefore of the evils and contemptuous machinations of the Americans. This must be said again and again, because there are so many humans who do not think far enough and want to hang it on us, that we throw the entire American people into the negative pot. So I say again that when we talk about any of these things, we are only talking about all the people with negative attitudes. This applies both to the Americans and to the nationals of all other countries on the earth. It should be understandable to every human being that we never ascribe bad and dark qualities and machinations to any human being and denigrate them with such, because when we speak of the evils of negative people and peoples, then it is self-evident that we speak only of the thinking and acting and of the evil machinations of those who are addicted to the negative.
This should be self-evident and would not have to be specifically explained and emphasized.
Unfortunately, this is not the case, because again and again there are voices that accuse us of speaking in the form of nations or peoples, that show everything negative and that are oriented in such a manner that we speak, for example, of Americans or Israelis, etc. From this we are then reproached for generalizing the Americans and Israelis in the form mentioned, and for lumping all the humans of the respective peoples into one pot, which is nonsense, of course, because we speak only of the really negative human beings and point out their inhuman machinations. That we have to mention and explain especially the positive people, that they of course have nothing to do with those who are negative on the whole. That is really superfluous, because in every country there are positive as well as negative human beings. And the positive ones must not be denounced, because they do not do anything wrong.
That is correct, and should be understandable to a person of intelligence-based understanding.
But please read this article, neither acid nor stress, but a bacillus.
The article is interesting with regard to the fact that the Helicobacter problem was finally recognized in large parts.
You told me once, or was it Quetzal, that most gastrointestinal diseases would be transmitted to humans by flies, by these critters depositing pathogens on fruits and vegetables, as well as on other food, which humans then eat. The same happens when flies run around on cups, glasses, bottles, knives, spoons, forks, etc., inevitably depositing pathogens that people then eat. According to your explanations, flies are the greatest evil in this relationship, and thus also the most important carriers of gastrointestinal diseases. But what about the infection speculations mentioned in the article? Is there anything to it?
With regard to the transmission of Helicobacter pylori, the speculations are correct. However, it is not mentioned that the disease can also be transmitted by kissing and the like. Also, no word is given to flies as the main infectious agents. There is also no mention of the fact that Helicobacter is responsible for various severe heart diseases and other organ diseases and can already be transmitted to the fetus in the womb, or, at the latest, to the infant through mother's milk after birth.
Thank you for your execution. I have one more question that refers to the Hale-Bopp comet. Is this really the comet that caused excitement in Egypt about 3,600 years ago, and about which different things were written as Nibiru at that time, and which is also called Nubiru and Eunice? By the way, I mistakenly wrote Uni instead of Eunice in the bulletins. Uni is another world body in our solar system, which has nothing to do with the comet Eunice or Nibiru, if it really is this one.
It is correct that the Hale-Bopp comet is the comet Nibiru known since ancient times.
Then again, a question about the appearance of the comet in this year, and the circulating assertion that the gods should return to the earth with this comet.
I have already explained in detail that all these assertions and speculations correspond to complete nonsense, as does the assertion that the comet is directed by the gods, or that the comet has any influence on the Earth or Earth humans or any other earthly life forms. Neither acid nor stress, but a bacillus.
Neither acid nor stress, but a bacillus.
The common bacterium Helicobacter pylori is considered the main cause of stomach ulcers. The principle no acid, no ulcer no longer applies. A few years ago, Helicobacter pylori HP, a bacterium, was pinpointed as the cause of stomach ulcers. Many human beings are infected with it, but only a few develop an ulcer.
By Ruth von Blairer.
A doctor who tests a patient for HP has great chances of finding it. In Switzerland, the infection rate is 30%. Among the over 60s, as many as 50 to 60% are carriers of this germ. However, HP only causes symptoms in the form of a stomach or duodenal ulcer in about 5% of those infected. Christoph Beglinger, chief physician at the Department of Gastroenterology at the Cantonal Hospital Basel, therefore recently warned at a media seminar organized by the pharmaceutical company Abbott, the detection of an infection with Helicobacter pylori is not a diagnosis and alone does not justify antibiotic treatment. In developing countries with poor sanitary facilities, practically all children over 5 are infected with the germ. And once HP has taken up residence in the stomach lining, it usually also remains there for life. It does not pass from the gastric juice into the blood, but it can be detected in stool, saliva, and dental plaque.
Infection, speculation.
It is likely that transmission occurs via stool in cases of poor hygiene, similar to hepatitis A, at best from mouth to mouth through the pre-chewing of food for small children, as is common in West Africa, or through the use of shared eating utensils. In our country, HP is also likely to find its way into children's stomachs via the chewed food moistened by the father or mother. Gastrointestinal specialists have occasionally infected their patients when they carried out tube examinations without gloves. And vice versa, patients became infected on examination equipment that had been sterilized carelessly. Human beings are considered the main, if not the only, reservoir for Helicobacter. However, it can also multiply in the stomachs of pigs and, at best, cats.
Helicobacter is not a disease.
Today, HP can be detected with a breath test that is simple and convenient for the patient. And this is apparently being done more and more often in doctors' practices, also when the patients have no complaints at all. If the test is positive, antibiotic therapy is also often initiated. HP infection alone, however, without further symptoms that indicate a stomach ulcer, for example, is not a disease, and treatment is then a superfluous, expensive measure, it was emphasized at the media event. The situation is different if the patient is suffering from an ulcer. A gastric or duodenal ulcer, however, can only be determined with certainty on the basis of a tissue sample obtained by gastroscopy. In this case, however, the unanimous opinion is that HP treatment is a must. Helicobacter pylori is not only almost ubiquitous but also a survival artist. The bacterium hides in folds of the gastric mucosa and cannot be treated with antibiotics alone. That is why there is still debate about the best way to treat it. More than 3,500 publications have appeared to date. In them, about 40 therapy regimens have been critically described and compared. The former sole ulcer therapy with gastric acid inhibitors or buffers has been abandoned in favor of a combination therapy with antibiotics. According to a 1994 consensus conference of the U.S. National Institute of Health (NIH), the treatment goal for all HP-infected ulcer patients is eradication of Helicobacter. Two so-called triple therapy approaches are preferred, either with a bismuth salt and 2 antibiotics or an acid-inhibiting drug and 2 antibiotics. Bellinger prefers the therapy with the acid inhibitors because it also relieves the stomach pain. In addition, bismuth is not popular with patients. It blackens the tongue, and a total of 11 tablets would have to be swallowed daily instead of only about 5. In addition, the treatment lasts 14 days, whereas it is reduced to 7 to 12 days with the antibiotics and an acid inhibitor.
Much fewer relapses.
The therapy and course of ulcer diseases of the stomach and duodenum have been decisively changed by the discovery of Helicobacter pylori, explained Rainer Munch from the Gastroenterology Center at the Herslanden Clinic in Zurich. The previously used treatment with acid inhibitors alone allowed the ulcers to heal, but 80 to 90% of the patients relapsed within a few years. If the Helicobacter is combated in a targeted way, these relapses are reduced to less than 2%.
HP newly discovered.
The first description of Helicobacter pylori HP is one of those scientific discoveries that, hardly made, were soon forgotten again. In 1892, doctors had observed unknown spiral-shaped rods in the stomach under the microscope. But the structures were thought to be impurities. It was not until 1982 that 2 researchers rediscovered the strange rods with their filaments in tissue samples of the intestinal mucosa and identified them as infectious germs. The scientists infected themselves with it in a self-experiment and were able to show that HP settled in their stomach mucosa. Because of its external similarity to a known intestinal bacterium, they initially named the germ Campylobacter pyloritis. Later it turned out that it did not belong to the Campylobacter family, and they agreed on Helicobacter pylori. HP is one of the few microorganisms that can live in the acidic environment of the stomach. It produces an enzyme itself that neutralizes stomach acid. The earlier ulcer therapy, which consisted exclusively of acid inhibition, had probably additionally supported the Helicobacter in creating an environment suitable for it. Stress and anger, along with excess acid, were long considered the main cause of gastric and duodenal ulcers. Since the dawn of the Helicobacter era, hardly anyone talks about this in professional circles anymore, RVB.
Der Landboot, Winterthur, Thursday the 17th of July 2003.
If any influences occur in connection with the comet in terrestrial humans, then these are absolutely and without any doubt based on delusional and pathological imaginations, which are in no direct connection with the comet.
Well, that is clear. But there are other assertions about which thick books are written, and all kinds of things are told. The phenomenon is called photon ring. It is supposed to be a huge light belt of highest intensity, and therefore a photon belt or photon ring into which Earth will immerse itself in the near future, whereby a light era will be initiated on Earth, so to speak, the really spiritual New Age time, etc. For your part, you have never told me anything about such a photon ring, and for my part, I have no knowledge or knowledge of my own. So what is to be thought of everything?
These assertions also belong in the realm of absolute nonsense, deception, and charlatanry, for everything is only built on deception for the sake of profit. The relevant facts are well known to us, and we find it frightening that so many people who believe in everything always address these false machinations and fall for them without asking for the real truth or researching it themselves to an appropriate extent. The faith of the Earth humans in such things is unfortunately so strong that truth and reality are simply disregarded and replaced by delusions regardless of their importance.
This already brings us to L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. What about the Scientology guidelines that exist today? Were these actually created after his death by his cult heirs, as is repeatedly claimed, or were they fundamentally produced in their entirety by himself?
First of all, it must be said that this sect is one of the worst on the earth, because it indulges and exists in an inhuman ethic. With this sect, everything is directed towards making the human being cold in feelings and emotions through a deep-reaching brainwashing. The sect guidelines were devised and established in every respect by the founder of the sect, Hubbard himself. Everything is structured according to his meaning and is handled according to it worldwide today. But we have already talked about it extensively several times.
I know, but I want to make this report official, why these things have to be discussed again. But now something else. You know that together with the group members and with Eva's dispatcher, I have been operating the Russia Aid for years, whereby without the financial help and the energetic cooperation of the group members, this enterprise would never have been possible. But now the situation is that the group can no longer raise enough funds to maintain everything. As you know, unemployment, short-time work, and constant inflation also cause us problems, which is why our own financial resources are becoming increasingly scarce. Also with the passive members, as well as with the Figu friends, the same problem occurs. Consequently, also from these sides, not enough donations arrive any longer, in order to be able to continue the Russia help in the past framework. The same problem also arises with regard to the core group donations for the annual holiday guests from Russia, whom we have been able to invite every year for about 3 weeks. Today we have practically no choice but to restrict everything, which means that we can only send food packages sporadically to Siberia and Latvia, perhaps only every 2 or 3 months for each family. And because of the Russian holiday guests, I guess, it will only be possible to invite them to us every 2 or 3 years, although I tend towards 3 years.
We should have talked about this earlier. I know your situation, and I think that parcels should actually only be sent sporadically, within the framework of 4 to 6 parcels per year, depending on your financial situation and the donations for these aid parcels. For the Russian holiday guests, I would like to suggest that you only focus on Eva's letter contact family, which also includes the elderly mother. These are the only persons you should accommodate in your future holidays, but not more than 4 people should be considered per time. I see the reason for this in the fact that this family is the only one who really cares about all concerns when someone of your group members goes on vacation to Siberia in order to also be active there in our mission. The years of the holidays should, however, be limited, whereby only every 3 years a holiday stay of the family should be realized in the center.
This vacation and assistance regulation corresponds also to my sense. Therefore, I will present everything in this framework to the group members for clarification and tuning.
As I said before, these issues should have been discussed and clarified earlier.
I have wanted to bring this up for quite some time, but because I did not write it down, I forgot it over and over again. But now the facts have finally been clarified. With regard to the Hale-Bopp comet, however, I have another question. The next approach to Earth will be at about 200 million kilometers. That is to say, about 50 million kilometers more distant than the Sun, because the Earth-Sun distance is about 152 million kilometers. So it is really impossible that any influences could be effective on the Earth, except those imagined by humans, as you explained. But now my question, the alleged once-in-a-century comet Hale-Bopp, how large is its real diameter without corona and tail, etc., just the lump itself? Do you have any cognitions about this?
There was no need for us to measure or examine the comet.
It measures 40 kilometers, a very decent chunk. That's what astronomers and those who call it a comet of the century say. perhaps because of its size or because of the bright comet's head. But that cannot be true, because already last year they proclaimed Hyakutake, or as it was called, in the same way, when the comet passed Earth only 15 million kilometers away, with a tail 25 million kilometers long, and with a diameter of 10 kilometers. It is said to have been the closest comet to Earth since 1556, and the brightest since the Western celestial body, which burst into 4 parts in 1976. Well, here I have another question concerning the destroyer. Semjase told me pretty much at the beginning of our contacts that the destroyer has been making its mischief in our solar system since time immemorial and destroyed old homeworlds of the Lyrans about 22 million years ago or so. To my knowledge, however, these lay in a different space-time structure, shifted by a fraction of a second to our space and time. How is it there that the destroyer came into our space-time structure after the destruction work with the old Lyrans?
The destroyer then broke through a space-time barrier created by the ancient Syrians as we still use it today, but in a modernized form, as you would say. At that time, these passage or dimensional gates, as we call them, were constructed in such a manner that they opened as soon as any object approached. This also happened as the destroyer approached, which through unfortunate circumstances came to one of these dimensional gates, shot through and entered this, your space-time continuum, then found its way into this solar system. Today, this would no longer be possible, because our passage gates from one dimension to another, or to the DL universe, have already been constructed and secured for several million years in such a manner that they are probably constant in one place, but only open in response to very specific impulses emitted by our spacecraft. So today, it would no longer be possible for a world body to pass unintentionally through one of our many-dimensional gates.
And since when do you have this safeguard?
I already explained that.
Of course, for millions of years.
Right. And before you ask, the development and construction of this safeguard took place as an urgent need after the incident when the destroyer of our ancestors was unintentionally able to change from one space-time structure to another.
Damage makes one wise. That is what we say.
A word of meaningful correctness.
As you well know, in our world everything is going topsy-turvy in the entire economy, and bankruptcies upon bankruptcies are being produced. Everything seems to be slowly collapsing. The entire credit and finance economy is now geared towards nothing more than accumulating debt. And this not only among ordinary citizens, but also in all sectors of the economy, and even with governments. Everything is heading towards a collapse of a kind that has never existed before. An unprecedented collapse is looming on the horizon, which probably can no longer be stopped. And why all this? I think it is the fault of the so-called young dynamic forces, which have great and crazy ideas, design everything according to the most modern principles, and stubbornly want to go through the wall with their heads. They have lost their sense of reality, and live according to the principle born to be wild. Born, in order to be wild, in a kind and wise through which all of humanity is rapidly approaching the final catastrophe. You have never heard that the human being is the blacksmith of his or her own destiny, and consequently, through his or her erroneous thinking and acting, determines his or her own demise, according to the word that the human being's destiny is the result of his or her own previous actions. The young have long since forgotten the thoughtfulness of the elderly, who thought about and thought through all that they had to do before taking action, and possibly taking an absolutely calculable risk. Today, however, this is no longer the case, for young people think only superficially, in manners that are too risk-adverse and too short-sightedly profit-obsessed, which inevitably lead to bad and grave mistakes, which inevitably lead to the collapse of things. But it also leads more and more to the fact that the older people, who have already gained a certain experience and taken some paths in life and learned all kinds of things, are no longer desired, but are scooped away like old rubbish and put offside. although they would be the ones who could bring the cart stuck in the dirt back on a flat road. Is that true or not?
Your words actually correspond to the sad circumstances. However, there would be a lot more to say, quite apart from the fact that the machinations of the younger generations, who today have the rudder in their hands, as you once said, are not only destructive, but even criminal, as well as selfish, antisocial, and egotistic in every respect.
I just thought again about your answer about the Hale-Bopp comet, about your answer that there was no need for you to measure or examine the comet. May I ask why not?
This question could not be left out either. Well, I will answer you and give you the necessary explanation. So far, there was no need for us, because comets of this size, like Eunice or Hale-Bopp, do not mean anything special for us, and on the other hand, they do not pose any danger for the Earth. If there were a danger for the Earth, then there would also be a corresponding need for us to deal with it more closely.
I find that strange, because otherwise you will investigate everything possible and impossible.
My statement does not aim to prevent us from dealing with the comet in the future in order to record all its data.
I want someone to understand you and your speeches. On the one hand, you say that you have no need to explore the comet, and on the other hand, you say again that you will do so after all.
I explained to you that there was no need because there was no danger from the comet. In the future, however, we will very much be working on it to compile the latest data after the solar orbit. We have old records of Comet Eunice, when it last penetrated into the area of the Sun and could be observed very well from Earth, which caused fear and horror as well as fantastic speculations among Earth humans. But such records are no longer relevant after a Sun passage, but must be renewed, because many changes arise, which can only be noticed when the comet moves away again from the near and far area of the Sun.
So then you could give me a more exact size with regard to the comet.
Such information would not be relevant, but if you are really interested, then I can find the necessary data from the old records until my next, or visit after the next visit, and then give it to you.
I would really be interested in that. Then I would only have purely private things left to talk about with you.